Hi, this is J.J. Burton, former NFL wide receiver and now keynote motivational speaker, and you're listening to Success is a Choice podcast.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And in a recent Gallup poll, football once again was far and away America's most popular sport to watch. Joining us today is the Director of Football Operations for USA Football, the national governing body for football here in the U.S. Keith Grabowski was a college football coach before joining USA Football. He is also the host of the Coach and Coordinator Show, which is the premier football coaching podcast in the country. Keith, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, we gave our listeners just a little bit of a background and snapshot of what you've done and what you're up to now, but kind of fill in the gaps. Tell us, what your journey has been like.
Well, it's been an interesting journey. I can say that, going back to my undergrad being a business major, graduating with a business administration degree, I worked in an automotive manufacturing company for 7 years. In that time frame, decided I had been coaching. I think to take a step back, when I was 19, I started coaching football down the street from the Baldwin Wallace College at a small little school called St. Bartholomew, 5th and 6th grade program, 7th and 8th grade program. And my dad, who was a high school coach, was coaching the team. So I started coaching with him, and I had always kind of looked up to him in that regard. I had always wanted to coach. I just didn't think it was going to start when I was 19 years old. But I had tore my knee up. That was my start with coaching. Graduated with a business degree because, I was back and forth. Did I want to be an educator or not? Both of my parents were kind of a little bit rebellious side. I wanted to do my own thing. But after, working in industry, decided, I do want to go back. I want to be a teacher, a coach. I really enjoyed doing this. So I actually worked full time and went to school overload, more hours than I ever did in my undergrad. It was crazy. It was like, I had this flex time. I worked out with them before flex time was popular. I'd go in like 6 a.m. and work, and then go to class at 10 and come back and work till 6 at night, and then go back to night school, and then every other weekend take classes. And it's just crazy like that for about a year and a half. I got my master's in education. I also got an undergrad in English literature. And so I became an English teacher and a coach. And so at that point, I had already been coaching high school ball a little bit. I spent 1 year, 2 years as an assistant, and then got my first head coaching job. I was a head football coach for 8 years. I made it to the college level after that. I was a coordinator on the college level over a span of 8 years. There was 1 year I took off from coaching to get my own little company started. I had a small coaching education company. I was doing my own writing. So it's been an interesting journey, but actually it all kind of weaved together into, what I'm doing now as the Director of Football Operations at USA Football. There's a business side to it. There's a little bit of a writing side to everything I do as well. And obviously I do my podcast, which, kind of highlights some of the best coaches around the country. So as crazy as it sounds, all the twists and turns in it, to me, it all was just a logical progression.
Well, who were some of the coaches as you were growing up that you kind of looked up to, in addition to your father? Were there some coaches you kind of modeled the way that you did things?
Well, my father, in the coaching staff he was a defensive coordinator. He was a head basketball coach. So certainly those guys, and one of his best friends, a guy named Tom Slacky, who actually was, I know you guys live in Barberton now. He was the superintendent there as well. But he was a guy I looked up to, and the way they did things. I can remember sitting in that little office they had. It was at Streetsboro High School in Ohio, and just absorbing everything there. I just wanted to be around it all the time. So those guys had a great influence on me. I know my high school coach, who was our defensive coordinator in position. He was my position coach on the offensive line. Joe Gressok had a great influence on me. I ended up being a coach for him. That was my first high school coaching job at Cleveland Central Catholic. here in Ohio. And those guys were a great influence on me. And then, as a coach, it's much easier today with the internet to be influenced by guys around the country. But I did a lot of reading. Lou Holtz was one. I read all of his books and would read about him often, and really liked the way he did things. And John Wooden was another one. I think by the time I was coaching, he was definitely retired, but there was a lot to learn from how his approach to the game and how he coached.
Now, you mentioned Lou Holtz. Were you the kind of coach that would tell your players, no matter who you were playing against, that they were the best team ever and that you don't know how you would beat them?
Never. I always focused on the positive, and was really, by the time I became a head coach, was really focused on the message that we were always sending to our players, that I always wanted it to be positive. And, to the point I had a coach who would help me, kind of go over what I was going to say pregame, I guess help me kind of script my pregame speeches, and he'd bring up ideas, and I would knock out all those ideas that brought in any kind of negativity that I wanted our guys to really believe, no matter who we were playing, no matter what, the difference might be in talent level, that we had a chance to beat these guys by going out and doing everything the right way.
Well, you've had some big-time guests, great coaches on your podcast, over 300 episodes. What have been some of the more memorable episodes, or some of the things that have stood out as you've talked to coaches?
Definitely there's been a lot of memorable episodes. I went back, and at the end of the year, we did a little blog that was a 12 podcasts of Christmas, and I picked 12 of my favorites there. One that just always stood out in my mind was a coach in Arkansas, Greenwood, Arkansas, named Rick Jones, and Rick just does a phenomenal job. I think he's a great person, and really has invested a lot in that program, in his community. And the thing that really was getting my attention with this guy, Rick Jones in Greenwood, Arkansas, is that a number of guests just from different parts of the country were naming him as a guy who was an influence. I don't even know who this guy is. And then I got him on. He's been on the podcast a few times. He's been great. I've actually listened to that one, I think, 3 times now. I'll go to Indianapolis to the office here a couple times a month, and every now and then I'll turn that one on because there was just so much to take from it. So that one was memorable. Definitely my interview with Ken Niumatalolo from Navy, I thought was one that stood out. Just his emphasis on understanding your why. What's your why? Making sure that everybody's on the same page, sharing that vision of developing young men of character and leadership, and that the why for them kind of dictates the how of their program. And I thought that was a very poignant message, and I think something that every coach can learn from. And then there's just great guys along the way. Herb Hand, who's now the offensive line coach at Texas. The one thing that sticks out, it was a fun interview, but the one thing that sticks out when I asked him about a mistake he made as a young coach, he told me the story about how, he put all these new jerseys in the dryer. He was responsible for, cleaning the uniforms after the game, and put the dryer on too high, forgot about it, and melted them into a ball. And I thought that was a pretty funny story. But, every single guy who's on the podcast, and I don't care what part of the country they're from, I don't care the level that they coach on, every single one of them, I think, leaves some tips for success that anybody can learn from as a coach. I know we're obviously football specific in our content, but I think these are guys who study and understand success a lot, and there's a lot to learn there.
Well, you mentioned Ken Niumatalolo, who is the Navy head coach, and it's always fascinating to me when you deal with service academies, how tough their regiment is, even away from football or basketball, and that sometimes going to football or basketball is actually the break that they get during the day. It's the fun part of their day. So, but I was wondering, you mentioned, know your why dictates your how. Do you think that what he does at Navy can be replicated across the board, not just at a service academy where you're dealing with high-level performers?
Well, definitely. And I know, he looked at some other jobs here in the past couple months here as they came open. I think, that it can be replicated. I think the things they do at the core of what they do probably aren't much different that, than what other people are doing. But I think, they're able to get the buy-in they need to keep their program moving forward. And I think with any program, I talked to, Brian Kite, who's in the leadership and field, about it all the time. And alignment is so important. So I think for those guys, it's about being aligned and that everybody has that same why in the vision of the program. It starts with the coaches. It filters down through the players. And, the truth of the matter is that at Navy, like many schools in Division I, I mean, they're very limited in their time. I mean, they have the 20-hour rule, but, those guys have a lot of other things to do outside of football. So they have to be very efficient with their time. And I think, that's an important thing to learn from with our young people today, really with everybody, with the people you have work for you, that you really have to be efficient with time. I think, and I've made the mistake before in my career of, I guess, getting involved in the grind and kind of wearing it as a badge of honor that, man, I work, 14 hours today, or I work 16 hours today. And I don't think it's about that. I think it's finding how to work smarter with the time you have. And I think that's something that Navy does a very good job of.
Do you have a bucket list of guests that have not come on your show yet that you would love to get on there?
Well, I would love to get Lou Holtz on, as I mentioned. I've just always loved what he's done. I love his story, just his personal story of how he came to that position and worked through the ranks. John Gruden, I've had the fortune of meeting him in my career. I recruited his son while I was at Baldwin-Wallace College. It's now called Baldwin-Wallace University. So I developed a little bit of a relationship with him. So from time to time, we'll text, but, obviously he's a busy guy. I would love to have him on the podcast. And, I think just getting some of those other, current guys who, are at the top of their game. I mean, everybody would love to talk to Belichick. We know that would never happen. So, I mean, it's almost like you take that one off your bucket list.
You look at the great high school coaches and the great high school programs that, the people you've talked to, even the Mount Unions of the world at Division III who have won 13 national titles in the last 25 years, or the Alabama football team, or the Patriots. What are some of the commonalities that you see? What do these programs do that maybe others aren't doing?
I think when you look at all of those, they're going to say it different ways. When you talk to them, I think if you sat down and interviewed every single one of those, there'd be a lot of commonalities in it. I think they would say it a lot of different ways. But I think you focus on some of those top programs. You mentioned Alabama, or, you look at maybe, mentioned Belichick and the New England Patriots. There's definitely, I think, a mission and a vision that everybody in the program knows and understands. Like Navy head coach said, it's about understanding your why. So there's that purpose-driven mission. I think the other thing you'll see in them, and again that I see around these coaches around the country, that there's a very detailed focus on how those things are done. I know the one sign that's in, allegedly, I guess I've read about it, that's in the New England Patriots locker room is do your job. And really it boils down to that. I think that everybody in those organizations understands exactly what their role is, exactly what their job is, and how to get it done successfully. I think they're all focused on that. So really that how part of it. And alignment, I think, is such an important thing. Everybody aligned and going in the same direction. And it's not about, that everybody has to be the same, that everybody has to have the same personality. I mean, I think we live in a society now that celebrates diversity, that celebrates different ways of thinking, and all those things make an organization stronger. But at the end of the day, everybody has to be pointed in that same direction. And I think, that's the one thing I see with those organizations that are successful, is that there is alignment. And it's not just within, when we go to the high school level, for example, it's not just within that high school football program. It's really that everybody in the district is aligned in a similar way towards the success of everybody in that organization and all the different, teams, departments, et cetera, that make it up, that they're going to support the people that, to help them make successful, and that there's an alignment in what everybody is doing.
So you deal with a lot of high school coaches as well. And, we have parents out there. We have people that are in high schools that are listening to us as well. What can they do maybe in their role as an educator, an administrator, as a coach of another sport, as a parent, to do what you just said, to support that high school sport, whether it be football or a different sport? How can they play into the culture, even if they're not the coach of that particular sport?
I think, I'm in a different role now as I've stepped away from coaching, and I sit in the stands and, watch my kids play and see, how different things are handled in different organizations. And I'm not always going to agree with things, and being aligned doesn't mean that you agree with every decision. It just means at some point you let go of your disagreement with it, and you help everybody move forward. And I always say it's good to bring some of those things up, but make sure you go to the person who can solve it. I don't think, being in an organization and, Monday morning quarterbacking everything is going to help anybody. Like, if you see a problem, if you see an issue, have the courage. And sometimes it does take courage to go to the person who can help solve the problem. I mean, obviously there's always a risk in that. You're putting yourself out there. But ultimately, if you feel it's something that needs to be said, don't go and chirp in the parking lot or on a forum somewhere or whatever it might be. That get those things out there. And I think today's coach, probably today's leader in general, has to be very transparent in what you're doing. I know, it used to be back when I first started coaching, and you hear from coaches like, "We're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about playing time." And I just think in today's world, you got to be willing. If you're going to lead, you're going to be out front. You got to be transparent in what you do. And so I think that's part of it. Having the courage to step up and talk to people, because at the very least, what you're going to walk away from it with is an understanding of why things are being done, and also an understanding, from a leadership perspective that, hey, maybe this is the perception that's out there, and that's something I have to address too. There's a responsibility and accountability in that. So for, organizations out there, for you to move together, I think it's understanding that everybody, has to work together. I was just on the phone with and doing a podcast with John Perry in Mississippi, who's at Pearl High School, and they won their first state championship. And he talked about, the reason they did it is because everybody in the district is aligned. That, he used to think that, we're not going to win a state championship if I don't have my players all off season. And he realized he has to work with those other coaches. That now it's to the point where they want their wide receivers, for example, playing or running track, that they know their quarterbacks are going to play baseball, that they know, their big guys are going to go and throw the shot, and that's okay. They find ways to work together, because ultimately it's about the success of those individuals too. You have to help everybody along the way. It is about making sure everybody in your program, in your organization, has a role, and certainly everybody wants to work to have a bigger role. But you got to support them along the way with where they're at and help them get to those points.
I hope that you're enjoying this interview with Keith Grabowski. We'll return to it in just a moment. His work of impacting youth football coaches and athletes goes hand in hand with the reasons why we wrote The Leadership Playbook, Become Your Team's Most Valuable Leader. Frederick Douglass once said, "It is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men." This book is perfect for student athletes and coaches to read before their next season. We want to build up strong children, strong youth, and strong student athletes. This book provides practical insights and stories to better develop team leadership and chemistry. To learn more, please visit theleadershipplaybook.com. And now back to our conversation with Keith Grabowski.
Well, you had recruiting expert Dan Tudor on one of your shows, and you've interacted with a lot of high-level high school coaches and college coaches. What kind of advice would you have for a parent that's listening right now to the show about helping their child prepare for the recruiting process?
Well, number one, emphasize and do everything you can to do your absolute best in the classroom. Having been at a couple of different colleges with different recruiting or different, I should say, admission standards, I know this, that the better you are in the classroom, the more rigorous your curriculum and the classes you take, the better opportunities you have, and the more opportunities you have moving forward. Like there's a stat somewhere out there that, with a 3.7, for example, you're going to be able to be recruited by 90% of the colleges out there, and then it starts to drop from there to the point where at a 2.0, maybe only 25% of the schools out there can recruit you. So you're going to raise your chances by excelling in the classroom. The other thing to remember for everybody is that at the end of the day, at some point, usually not when you want it, ball is going to end. Sports are going to end. And you have the rest of your life to deal with. We always talked about 4 years for the next 40 years, that it's not about just these 4 years, that this is to set you up for the rest of your life. So I see a lot of kids out there making the mistake. We hype up signing day. We hype up that opportunity that you sign a college scholarship, and I'll see them, take a scholarship at maybe something, a college or university that they're well beyond as a student, places that could probably do much more for them as a student, and they might sign for, that $1,000 to say that, they signed on signing day. That you have to remember, it is about the next 40 years after that you're going to have to work, that you're going to have to live a life, that you're going to have to support a family. So I think you need to keep those things in mind. What are you going to do when this ends? What happens if you tear your knee up and you got to start on that life a little bit sooner? Where are you going to be to put yourself in a position for success?
Has the coaching profession changed over the 25 plus years that you've kind of been around it? Have you seen much of a difference through the years? And if so, what is that difference?
I think the biggest thing I see now is that the kids today really want to understand and know the why a lot more. I know my kids all the time, they drive me crazy with it sometimes, but it's not just like when I grew up, an adult, and it really didn't matter who told you to do something. You just went and did it. Today, it doesn't happen that way anymore. That you, like I said, you have to be more transparent. There has to be that understanding that you have to dig deeper with the people who you're leading, that they are aligned. Going back to what we talked about with Navy is what's our why? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? That you have to, I think, educate them deeper on the things you're doing so they see how it fits. They want to see how things fit a little bit more. And, I think the better organizations out there do a great job of that everybody understands why they're doing certain things. They're not just doing it to do it. And when you have that understanding, I think you have better buy-in. I think you also empower people to be innovative as well.
Football safety, major concern today at all levels, but particularly at the youth and the high school levels. What's your take on this issue? What's the best strategy going forward?
I think overall it's a little bit of a frustrating situation that there's a few studies out there that get all the press, and there's other doctors out there talking about it. There's been other reports that have come out. They're not as controversial, right? I don't know if that's just where things are with the media today, but I see a lot of that out there. And for me, I started thinking about this stuff before it really came to the forefront of, in the media about the safety side of things. And ultimately, in looking at this, what I had concluded as a coach, that really the group that truthfully saves the game, that helps it move forward in a positive way, is the group of coaches. Collectively, it's coaches. We have to look at our techniques and what we've been teaching, the stuff that I learned. I shake my head now at some of the things we did. My coaches were doing their best. They weren't out there trying to put our health at risk. They're just coaching us at the time how they knew to coach things. So we know a lot more right now, and I think this has been a great opportunity for us to refocus on how do we make this game safer. And I think the advances in technology with equipment, I think the advances in technology on the medical side are outstanding. We've certainly learned a lot more about it and what we need to do. But again, how do we keep the head out of the game? And that was like a driving force for me of going out and finding our subject matter expert, a guy who, I was aware of out there, and partnering with him at USA Football to bring some of the most effective techniques, with the sidebar being that actually they're the safest techniques as well, because we don't use the head. In fact, we went out in November and shot all these drills and techniques, and we have guys, high school kids out there going full go, and all they have on is a pair of shoulder pads where they're going to fit their hands, and there's no head contact involved. I mean, I look at it this way, and our subject matter expert, Scott Peters, says it all the time, that, I want to have a great airbag in my car, but I don't want to test it all the time. And that's how we have to view the helmet. So it used to be like when I played, and probably till maybe 5-6 years, or maybe even closer than that the helmet, you turn in at the end of the season, if it was all scarred up, that was like a sign of your toughness. And right now, the sign of superior technique is that helmet is just about as clean as it was as when you got it in August, and you're turning it in the same way. We want to keep the head out of the game. And we can do that. We can play this game in a better way, and it's going to be as physically demanding, as tough as it was at any time. It's just now we've been forced to look at how do we do those things and look at things differently.
Well, looking back on your career, you've probably faced some challenges, some obstacles, some struggles. Have you had a favorite failure, something that maybe you overcame and made you better along the way?
I think as a young head coach, one of the failures I had is I had a particular year where I think I failed to really understand the needs of my coaching staff, and maybe assume that, hey, all these guys are expert in their areas, and they're doing what they need to do. And I didn't focus on them enough and their needs enough, and understanding that they need supported as well. Maybe almost putting too much of my focus on that group below them, the players, and what the players needed, and not giving enough attention to what that coaching staff needed as well to get their jobs done, or to spend time with their family, or whatever it might have been. So, I think it's always about finding that balance, which has always been a challenge for me. Again, finding that balance, between how much you're working, how much you're spending time with your family, giving things the attention that they need on both sides. I think err on the side of being a workaholic at times. But, you need to be able to shut things down and be where you are. You don't necessarily always spend your time, and you shouldn't spend your time while you're at work worrying about, things going on in your personal life. And you definitely should never bring that work side of things into your family time.
Do you have a podcast or two other than your own that you would recommend our audience listen to, or maybe a book that you've read recently that you would recommend?
There's a couple I listen to. For me, the time I'm usually listening is if I'm driving to the office in Indianapolis, which is about a 4.5 hour drive for me. So I'm usually listening to I'll listen to the Focus 3 podcast. Brian Kite, someone who's been on my show, we did a series here, and really appreciate what those guys do. The other one I listen to quite a bit is Mike Dillard, which is Self-Made Man is the title of his. He always has some interesting guests on, people doing a lot different things than me, but again, it's finding those, I think, clues and tips for success. And I think there's, podcast's a great place to do that right now. There's a coach who I've had on the show, Rick Jones from Greenwood, Arkansas, calls it Automobile University. And so, I found I've listened to much less music on those rides and much more with the podcast. I love the medium for sure.
Keith, where can people connect with you or reach out to you or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Coach K Grabowski. That's Grabowski. I am pretty active on Twitter. I know, I have an Instagram account. I just haven't gotten into that as much. I have a Facebook account, but I use that maybe more to connect with friends. So the best place is probably there. And my email address, for coaches out there is Grabowski@usafootball.com.
Excellent. We'll put those in the show notes so people can connect with you. We'll also put some of the episodes that you've had that you mentioned in this podcast so people can check out those. And really appreciate your time. You're doing some great things there with USA Football, and your podcast is great. Whether you're a football coach or coach baseball, basketball, whatever, you can learn a lot from those podcasts. So thanks a lot, Keith, for being on the show.
All right. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Keith is doing some great things with USA Football. He's having quite an impact on coaches across the country, which in turn influences our youth. If you're a coach, football or otherwise, I highly encourage you to check out his podcast. Some of them might be more technical from an X's and O's standpoint, but you can learn a ton about creating a championship culture in your program by listening to his guests who have done just that. Also, if you haven't yet done so, please take just a quick second to hit that little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks so much, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?